All right, my friends, J.R. Dukes here. Appreciate you joining me as always, and I got a great video for you today. You know, our beloved favorite president, President Donald Trump, is fighting many cases around the country. Specifically, yesterday, he went to a court of appeals out of D.C. to appeal the lower court ruling out of D.C. from that crazy liberal judge that is an Obama appointee. Well, he has appealed her order gagging our former president. So we're going to get right into it right now because I want to take a look at this with you and let's see what you think. Here we go.
We're back with one of the most significant days in court yet in Donald Trump's coup case because Jack Smith thinks it's important enough to secure the fairness of the case and the plan he has to try to present his evidence and convict Donald Trump and then possibly send him to prison, that he needs this Trump gag order. So that went to the appeal today. We have the audio from it. We don't usually get that kind of thing, so we have a lot more to get into here.
And remember that they're trying to throw our president in jail. Just like he said, actual jail time, if you can grasp this. I mean, this is individuals that are not playing around. You talk about election interference, you're getting election interference. This time, it's from the Democrat machine, the Democratic Party, the Democratic president, the Democratic solicitors and attorney generals that are all conspiring, including Democratic appointed / elected judges that are going after our former president.
And as Maya and I and David were just discussing, a big part of this case is not just the gag order, which is procedural in the trial. It's the underlying violence and election crimes that are being adjudicated throughout the country.
Election violence and other crimes? Hello. Were you around on January 6th? Did you hear the news reports the way I did? Obviously, the Democrats have been the ones trying to drive the narrative ever since January 6th. Now, do I like everything that happened on January 6th from both sides? No, I definitely do not. However, let's be straight up and let's be honest about it. January 6th was a problem. Not that it was an insurrection in the truest sense of the word. What it was a security failure on the part of the Democrats. At the time, if you remember, Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. She was warned that this was going to be a huge rally. Huge, as our former president would always say. It was a huge rally, and of course it turned out to be a huge rally. Yet, she decided not to have additional security brought in to make sure that the Capitol was protected and was secure. So they can call it whatever they want to call it. When Donald Trump is elected again as president, we're going to see a lot of these wrongs righted.
You heard me mention people are presumed innocent unless they plead guilty and get convicted.
Or unless they're Donald Trump.
Then they become convicts. And in Georgia, not the D.C. case.
I got to talk about this also. You heard this reporter. This guy, by the way, is one of the most liberal reporters that you can come across. And obviously he works for MSNBC, which is one of the most liberal legacy media places that you could probably just think of off the top of your head. What he said a second ago was, unless you plead guilty, then you are guilty of something. Well, that's not the way it works. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, I constantly try to point out and educate everyone on this particular fact. Just because you plead guilty in a court of law does not mean that you committed a crime. It does not mean that you're guilty. It does not mean that you are culpable, that you actually did it. What it does mean is in the eyes of the law, you're guilty. In other words, people take guilty pleas because they want to have some kind of control of the outcome. They would rather go ahead and plead guilty to a crime that they never committed than take a chance that they would spend the rest of their lives in a cage. Yes, a cage, away from their families, away from their children, away from their partners, their wives, whatever. This is real life. This is the real nature of the justice system that we have here in America. It's not a terrible, terrible system like the rest of the world has, but it's far from being a perfect system. One of my greatest missions with my channel, frankly, with my life nowadays, is to educate everyone on the way our system of justice works. It has many, many problems, and this is one of them. The only good news here that I can tell you is that our president, going through this, he's able to get a firsthand account, a firsthand look of what happens to individuals that don't have money, individuals that get caught up in the system unjustly, individuals that become a target of a powerful individual for one reason or another. It's very concerning and very troubling, and we all need to make sure we understand the true nature of our justice system.
We have seen that happen on some of the smaller offenses. Indeed, right now we have the former lawyer for one of Donald Trump's co-defendants in that RICO case. You may remember former Trump attorney Kenneth Chesebro cited not only in Georgia, but also in this Jack Smith case. I've told you about these overlaps. He's co-conspirator 5, unindicted in the DOJ case because of the fraudulent slates of presidential, the smaller offenses.
He was the guy. He was the guy. That Kenneth guy was the one I did a video on a week or two ago that took the plea deal in Georgia pertaining to Fani Willis and that so-called RICO case. You're welcome to go see that video if you like a detailed explanation of that. But the bottom line is you have another individual that has a family, has a wife, has a law license, did not want to take a chance on going to prison over something very minor that the prosecutor there, Fani Willis, has went after him with the full weight and resources of the Georgia government.
Right now we have the former lawyer for one of Donald Trump's co-defendants in that RICO case. You may remember former Trump attorney Kenneth Chesebro cited
Kenneth Chesebro,
not only in Georgia, but also in this Jack Smith case. I've told you about these overlaps. He's co-conspirator 5, unindicted in the DOJ case because of the fraudulent slates of presidential electors that were being used to, quote, obstruct the certification. That's it.
See, he might have done something pertaining to the slate of electors walking out, and he may have approached them or whatever. I'm not sure what the entire story is. He just didn't want to take a chance of spending the rest of his life, at least the rest of his meaningful life, in prison on a very small infraction that he may or may not have committed. So he goes ahead and pleads guilty to something that he can at least control on some measure.
In the federal Jack Smith Trump indictment. Chesebro played that role on those electors. We know that. He's convicted for a version of that in the Georgia case where he struck a plea deal. Now, we don't know whether he'll remain an unindicted co-conspirator in the federal case or ultimately, having pled to similar issues in Georgia, face further charges.
Yeah, that's very scary, too. This individual went ahead, took a plea deal in Georgia. There's no guarantee that the feds won't turn around and hammer him on some type of charge. Just because you take a plea deal in a state case with state prosecutors does not mean that the feds cannot go after you afterwards. It is true that it is the policy of the Department of Justice that if you take a deal in a state case and they have adjudicated the particular charges in question, they generally will not go after you as a matter of policy, as a matter of their internal procedure rules. But that's no guarantee. You have somebody like Joe Biden and his administration and cronies that's going after you to snuff you out. They want his boss, specifically Donald Trump. So there's no guarantee he will not face additional charges in a federal court for the same alleged crime.
We have a very special guest as we look at all these issues together, and we always try to understand all of it with the people who are involved if they are willing to come out and take questions in public. That's what journalism is, and I'm thrilled to tell you that the former lawyer for Kenneth Chesebro there in Georgia, Manny Arora, is with us tonight, as is former prosecutor David Kelly. Manny, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. You're close to this. You have a perspective on some of this. First, what did you think of the arguments that Trump's defense lawyers were making today? Do you think they had any merit?
I think a lot of this that hasn't been discussed is the gag order stuff is a little bit of a stall tactic because
if you notice, he did not answer the question. The reporter asked him, did the charges or did the argument that the president's lawyers were presenting, did they have any merit? He doesn't answer the question. He's deflecting. He's talking about something else he wants to talk about.
Criminal trials, and I've been doing this for 30 years or so, and we do a couple of trials a year. Gag orders are essentially there to protect the jury pool so evidence doesn't get out or statements don't get made that could taint the jury pool and delay the process even longer. if someone truly makes a threat to a witness or a prosecutor, it's not a gag order issue. It's not a criminal contempt. You just revoke their bond and you put them in jail. And that's happened to several.
He is right, in my opinion, on this particular point. Let me know if you agree. Put in the comments below. I'm curious of what you think about this particular case with all these gag orders being issued against our president. Imagine being in court, having to fight for your life, and yet the judge tells you cannot defend yourself. This individual, this attorney is correct that generally gag orders are issued by the courts to protect the jury, to basically protect the integrity of the case. However, that's not the situation with this particular judge. They are allowing everybody else to hammer and to simply go out and belittle, to lie, if you will, about the president, or at least attack the president. And yet in an election season, a Democratic appointed DC federal judge wants to go ahead and tell our president, if you say anything about this case, you will be put in jail. You talk about election interference, it doesn't get any more cut and dry. And I hope that the Court of Appeals, or ultimately the Supreme Court of the United States, will go ahead and allow our president to defend himself by removing the gag orders.
Several of our clients with very innocuous statements that the government found out about on social media, and they locked them up. And so while we're talking about these gag orders,
let me jump in and say, if you're going in that direction, which is interesting, then do you think that anything Trump has done here in public regarding people like Mike Pence, Bill Barr, and Meadows rise to that level?
I don't think so. As the Court of Appeals essentially said, that these are people that their testimony isn't going to change, nothing's going to be different, versus somebody like the young woman that was the election worker. That person could actually be impacted. So you have to sort of take it on a case-by-case basis. But gagging somebody isn't necessarily, or in my experience, ever been the issue. You just revoke their bond and you put them in jail if you think they've threatened somebody.
That's exactly right. If you have a defendant that's out on bond and they commit a crime by threatening somebody, what we call a terroristic threat, then the recourse is you go to the judge, you put on the evidence for that, and you have their bond revoked and you put them in jail. Generally, if it's a federal court type situation, the defendant, the person accused, would be entitled to another trial by a jury on the alleged terroristic threat.
David?
Well, look, I don't disagree with what he said, but as I said at the outset here, this is a collision between protected political speech and the sanctity of a criminal proceeding, which is not usual.
I agree with that also. When it comes to the American judicial system, when it comes to law, it's always a balancing act. It's always a test. Just like he mentioned, it's the political establishment versus the courts telling you that you can't say something. So it's free speech butting up against the right to speak in a political environment, specifically an individual running and the leading candidate for president of the United States again. So anytime you're in court and you're having issues like this, it's always a test of one thing over another, which one is most important. I've had it explained to me years ago by an attorney friend of mine as a car. A tire specifically on the car meets the pavement, the road. Where you have the tire hitting the road, you have one interest being pushed up against another interest. In this metaphor, the road would be free speech, and maybe the tire would be the ability of an individual to run for president of the United States.
I think that if he were to violate the gag order, that yes, it would be also, I think, a violation of his conditions of release that could justify his imprisonment. But this case is a little bit, as much as Judge Chutkan wants to say, we're going to treat this like any criminal case, the bottom line is it's not really, because of the fact that you have this parallel track going, which happens to be a presidential campaign. In which he's the front runner. And then you have this collision. So it doesn't make it as simple as we're used to dealing with, which I agree. You violate, you go and threaten a witness implicitly or otherwise, you're gone. Not so much here.
Yeah. I mentioned Bill Barr, among others, and I take Mr. Aurора's point.
That's the main point as far as this particular video is concerned. It is the absolute truth that this case is so outrageous. All of these cases are an outrage. It is an affront to our American system of justice. It's a worldwide embarrassment, a national disgrace, and it should stop. It should have never went forward. It should have never even seen the light of day. It is really horrific that we have our system of justice being weaponized against the leading individual for president of the United States. If this was happening in any other country around the world, even a country like El Salvador, where you had one person in power using the weight of their government to take out the other party, we would be in a complete uproar. We would be telling them and chastising them and tell them, hey, either knock it off, otherwise we're going to cut funding, or there's going to be some other type of serious penalty that you're going to pay. And yet we look like a laughing joke. We look like people that are incompetent, not able to have proper elections. It has to stop. Just because they hate Donald Trump is no reason to put our country through all the nonsense that they're putting us through. Do you agree or do you disagree? Put it in the comments below. I really want to hear from you. I really like to know what your perspective is. I'll be following this case, obviously, like I'm following the other cases, but you all have to get out there and spread the message that I'm trying to spread. We need Donald Trump next year. We need him to win the election. If he doesn't win this next election, it is going to really be some dark days ahead for us. I just have to be optimistic and trust in God and trust in you to hear what I'm saying and to get motivated, to get out, to take action, to talk to your neighbors, to educate yourself and your neighbors and your family, and most importantly, get to the polls and vote in this upcoming election next year in 2024. It sounds like it's a long ways away, but trust me, it will go by really quick. At any rate, I definitely enjoy your time, and I appreciate you coming to see what I have to say. It is always my pleasure anytime you tune in. Always make sure to hit that thumbs up button. And remember, if you subscribe, it's 10 years of good luck. 10 years of good luck. If you don't believe me, go ahead and subscribe and see what happens. At any rate, I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be having another video coming out very soon. Keep that mind free. Never give up. I am J.R. Dukes.